So this migration out of the cities into the countryside, when it's fully, let's say, populated, and the migration has shifted, and wouldn't say it's over, but it's reached its apex and it's on the way down.
5 is my guess. And the reason I say that is going back to what I said earlier, the more recent data has to be weighted more heavily than ancient data. So now if you're going back when no one had cars and it was a migration by foot or ox or donkey, that would be a whole different place. But now you drive there in 3 hours, and you're out into the quote unquote country, or at least into the suburbs. So we have to take that into account. I would say 5 is probably enough. And the most disruption usually comes from the most fear. Those that come out in fear that I've got to get mine at all costs, that kind of an attitude, that goes away. I mean, not that it isn't there, it will be there. But over time and in short durations, the big disruptions usually get quelled fairly quickly.
Good afternoon, everyone. David Morgan today from themorganreport.com. We've done a talk, it's been about 6 months ago during the summertime, about how we thought the world would be moving with sound money, inflation, and changes that you would see geopolitically across the landscape here. And not even 6 months later, a lot of things we were talking about are square in front of us. So today's talk, we could talk doom and gloom, but you can get your own fill of that on the news. This is more about solutions and a way to reframe what's happening out there to take away this paralyzing fear that's running through the nation. And people I'm talking to outside in different countries are also feeling it because they know what happens here happens to the rest of the planet. Now, as we're transitioning, I am of the volition that the Jupiter-Saturn great conjunction that everybody had seen in the news on the solstice, December 21st, was a crossover point magnetically where now the 4 gas giants in the outer solar system are really in earnest beginning to create their own magnetic field. With this said, when that happens, there's going to be an extra magnetic field in our solar system that hasn't occurred since 79 AD was the last time we saw this pattern. So you think at the bare minimum, we're on a 2,000-year cycle. The climate's already starting to fall out. And I think this is more of a distraction away from the food insecurity coming, the economic shift, whatever form that takes, because we see gold, silver, and cryptocurrency are popping up more and more and more in just general conversation about ways to protect your wealth, hold wealth, and preserve some sort of value as we move through this transition. And overcoupling everything, of food is at all-time 6.5-year highs globally, 10-year highs in Asia. Soybeans just hit $13, and Argentina suspended all corn exports. Turkey cut all import tariffs for food because they're already worried about something happening because people are hungry in the country. And it just rolls on and snowballs and snowballs. And what you're seeing over in Spain, in Barcelona, they're cross-country skiing through the streets, feet of snow. It's the most snow they've ever had in Spain. The coldest temperatures ever recorded in Spain, 34 degrees below zero. Coldest this year ever recorded in Russia. Coldest this year ever recorded in China. Hundreds of stations in Japan breaking all-time snow records going back 300 years. They're at 10, 12 feet plus on the snowstorms. And it just keeps rolling. And now today's news feed, deserts in Saudi Arabia are covered in ice. So something has definitely jumped the shark here on, and the overlap on when the magnetic fields began intensifying in earnest. Each year forward, it's going to get way more intense. So if you were a global body like United Nations or a global, let's say, overseership of the planet, like the individual countries in their unified body nation, would you try to distract the populace while all these things were happening, while you were preparing in the background? If so, then the money is going to be one of the first things that's going to be let go to create more instability. And as we look out into the landscape, all this greatest magnetic coupling will occur October of 2024. So between now and then, we're going to watch the climate patterns completely fall out. Food production is going to be incredibly difficult from this point forward. We're already seeing all-time highs in foods. Brazil suspending exports as well. They hit that quota on soybeans because China had bought so much and Brazil was like, no more exports. So we're seeing it across the planet now, people protecting their food supplies. And where does it take it from here? Because if you don't have food for a society, that bar of gold could be laying next to you, but it's worthless, really. So David, thanks for joining me. I know it was a long-winded opening there, but just trying to set the scene for, what you see and what I see moving forward, because I really think all of these things are interlooped on top of each other, and one is a distraction or a cause of the next on the next, and it just that intertwining like cogs or gears in the back of a Swiss watch. I'll let you take it from here.
No, that was a great opening. I don't know how much I can add, but I do definitely want the conversation. I think I'll go, big picture. I think we did this last time, but it bears repeating. So if you go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's the ultimate central planning facility. So everything was centrally planned. The system collapsed, and North Korea was totally dependent on Russia to get their food supply. And many people starved after the collapse. However, Cuba, who was also dependent, had a different take. Michael Rupert pointed this out, and I learned it from him, that the management, let's call it, of Cuba said, you know what? It's a communal society. All open land is everyone's land. Go out and grow food. So they let people go out and grow food in Cuba. Within a couple of years, they were actually self-sustaining by everybody basically getting off their butts and growing their own food. So there is a solution here, but it's actually fairly simple. Yes, it takes work, but we're seeing that the controllers don't want that. I know you're pretty close to the Ice Age farmer. I've never had a direct conversation with them, but what's happening in the meat packing plants, what's happening with this pseudo, chicken flu and this and that, and they're slaughtering, all kinds of animals, and on it goes. And you're probably a little more studied on that than myself. But the point being is that the powers that be don't want us to be self-sufficient. And that's what it's going to take. So, peaceful resistance, what is more harmless than growing a plant, really? And yet you're not allowed to do that in some instances. So back to you, I want to point out that, that's kind of the big picture, that we do have the power. We have to take it in and of ourselves. And I'm not telling anyone to break the law, but there's a lot of laws that are against natural law. And natural law is the ability to own your own body and to feed it well. And I don't think anyone has the authority over you, even though they may edict it, they might mandate it, they might state it, they might announce it, and they might punish you for it. Still doesn't make it right. Just because something's written down on a piece of paper or mandated over a loudspeaker doesn't make it right. And I think this is the ultimate war, as we talked about off air before we started. It's a war of good and evil. Growing your own food is good. Telling you not to grow your own food is evil.
Control of the food is the main point. And if you look at it, everything that's moved in the last 6 months or a year is about consolidation of food control and getting every government on the same page for the resource chain across the planet. I would envision rationing coming in, not because there's a lack of food, but because if they ration food for the citizens, the governments and the UN body and all these other types of global agreements can then stockpile as much as they want, because if they're only giving the populace 20% and we would normally consume 50% of that, they could scrape the other 20% and take it and use it for preparedness for themselves. Now, control of the food, the point is going to go where you're going to have to jump through hoops, hurdles, fire hoops, and whatever to get into supermarkets. And they're discouraging a lot of people from growing your own food as well. Anytime your co-op and your group of your clan, if you will, gets large enough for a community garden, once it reaches a certain size of approximately 1 acre of full production where you're feeding multiple families, for some reason, the authorities always come in and say you can't do that. So how do you walk the fine line in neighborhoods? I know some areas you can't even grow plants that produce food. It has to be 100% ornamental in a lot of places. So using your backyards, maybe you have to be with your neighbor and then half the garden is in theirs, or you find neighbors that have an intersection, like a 4 corners area, and each individual neighbor has half an acre in their yard, and then it turns into a 2 acre garden. But when people come by, it's only a 1/4 acre on my plot here. What are you talking about? So walking through this thin line, and the control of food and the seed supply is going to get much more intense as we move forward. I'm already getting rumblings of seed suppliers getting incredibly low on an enormous amount of seeds. And then what you'll find is they'll still have things like collard greens and kale and that sort of thing. But when you get up to the more upper end thing of the tomatoes and the different kind of peppers, they're running out. Myself, I have these fruit trees. So I got 15 pawpaw trees coming next week. So, a lot of people, and again, reframing it, a lot of people are looking for chaos coming next week. I'm stepping aside back onto my farm and looking so forward to these 15 pawpaw trees that I'm getting. They're potted, and we're going to replant them out in the area to start the orchard for this year. And that's my whole frame of reference, is getting so excited about these trees coming in so I can plant them, do something in harmony with nature, bring food back. They're only 7 feet tall, but this year they should produce at least some fruit. Pawpaw are real fast producers. So reframing the reference of what you can do with others to help each other and not in a communified communist way of sharing everything, but have rules with it. If you're going to have a community farm, there's got to be rules, not just be like, hey man, peace and love, I'll pick a tomato today and maybe fertilize. There has to be a set rule and schedules for production out of that thing too. So if anybody's taking part, there's already like a protocol list already written down, or people can find it and they need to know how to jump in, what to do. And then there's timelines with that and expected work for anybody that's in there. Nobody rides for free.
Agreed. Yeah, a couple thoughts that came to mind. Another big picture one. First of all, everything runs off energy, and food is our energy for the human being. So in a corporate farm, it takes 10 calories of energy to produce 1 calorie of food. And that's how inefficient they are. But if we have a community farm, where your example of the 4 corners coming together, everybody has a quarter acre or whatever, you can actually produce quite a bit of food. Yeah, it's manual labor, but it's actually more energy efficient than a corporate farm. Plus, there's variety, and there's a lot of good reasoning behind why that actually works out better. So I think that's a point that needs to be thought about. The other one is that we are able to do stuff that you've pointed out that's pretty simple to do, and that's the microgreens. This is something where basically just seeds in and of themselves can be sprouted, and that's highly nutritious. That takes hardly any space whatsoever, and it's a great way to have a salad. In fact, I'm somewhat of a health nut. I'm certainly not pure organic or any of that, but I use sprouts as my lettuce often for my tacos or my hamburgers. Just having those sprouts on there instead of lettuce, to me, gives a little more moisture, a little more crunch, and a little more flavor than just a piece of lettuce would. And the last thing I want to comment on and give it back to you, David, is The Big Short. If you remember the character played by Brad Pitt, who had already made all this money, and my take on the movie, my interesting point of view is, he's seen all this money, seen all the greed, seen all the Wall Streeters, and he basically walked away from it, just saw how sick these people really were, that they could never get enough of what they don't need. And he just basically walked away. And in that movie, if you recall, he said seeds are going to be the next, gold or whatever. I forget the exact phrase, but he emphasized that seeds would be highly valued as this whole system started to unwind and find its way down the slope, so to speak. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm a fan of history, and I know you do a lot of study in trying to correlate silver prices to food prices like I do. Looking back in the past, well, one thing about the microgreens, when you have those trays and you start growing them, obviously you're not going to get every single one. And that's a great way to do your starters in the house to, get things protected. So when they get up about an inch, you're going to have leftovers, let's say that inside the sprout tray, that soil, and you're going to have the root matter inside there. So you just cut it in little cubes, or I even plant the entire tray in just one go, and you'd be surprised what grows out of there. And it's its own little section in the garden that starts magically. And it's a great starter, by the way. If you don't, and even if you think you harvested every one of them, there's still a few buried seeds that hadn't germinated yet in there. You'd be surprised. There's always a couple, 5, 10 that didn't germinate. And when you put them in a proper soil and they get enough, they do come up. But I'm curious, where do you think we're going with the food here? And what can you see from the past? Because if we have the food, obviously we can barter it for other things. There's some beekeepers around my area, and because I'm planting buckwheat this spring as a pollinator habitat, I'm going to do 4 acres of buckwheat, and I'm going to bring that to the actual grain so I can harvest it. But the favor for me to pollinate the field or get it up to a pollinator phase is they're going to trade me honey for me using my land to put a crop, which I wanted anyway, for the ancient grain of it. But then they're going to trade me the honey for that. So, that's one way to go about it, bartering. But, gold, silver obviously have been used in the past. But what else have you heard of, in your research that people might want to take into consideration, seeds or labor or whatnot, that in the past, historically, during times of duress, when centralized systems break down, that they used to be able to, get something of value from another person. Yeah, I'm trying to phrase it without reusing the same words again and again.
First of all, the premise that, if you have money, you're free. If you have money, you can get whatever you want is a fallacy. If there isn't any food available, doesn't matter. As you said earlier in the conversation, you have a gold bar, there's no food, doesn't do you any good whatsoever. However, having said that, if you study, and I've always weighted the most recent history as more important than ancient history. Not that you shouldn't look all the way back and peer as deeply as possible, but like in the stock market, what a certain company did in the last month or two is more relevant to its future price than what it did 2 years prior. So the same thing with the food supply. So if we look at what happened in Venezuela, what you find is that you could trade or barter with silver probably better than anything else. Now, it might be the preferred thing might be honey for buckwheat. That might be the number one. But the number two isn't, quote unquote, money like bolivars. It would be physical metal. And in the case of Venezuela, what I found, I had a great read and also an interview from this gentleman that was there. So it's like firsthand information, was jewelry. And we talked about this last time, but a silver chain, silver ring, silver bracelet, that type of thing. I don't think that would work as well in the U.S. I think really most citizens here think about, a dime, a quarter, a $50, a silver round, half an ounce of silver, 100 ounces of silver. They think in terms of ounces and coinage. But still, silver, gold is gold. So it doesn't matter what form it is. It's what is the weight and what is the purity, and that's the way you make a transaction. So I'm not saying silver is a solution, but it is the next best in line situation. I go a step further. I'm in Washington State, as most people know. And to the south of me is the Palouse, which is well known worldwide for growing a great deal of wheat. But there's also a lot of animals in the area as well. And a lot of this breakdown that we've talked about earlier is occurring. But yet there's also I won't call it the underground economy, but it's called the alternative. And that is a lot of local butchers are basically backed up because there's a lot of local farmers that grow, onesie twosies. Now, these might be people with, 20 head or 100 or whatever, but nothing like a corporate farm where we're talking thousands. And they're able to process for the local community. So, it's going to be interesting how it unfolds. But I think the main preparation we can give is one of my favorite sayings: chance favors the prepared mind. If we see what's coming, and I think you as well as anybody, I'd say you and Christian, Adapt 2030 and the Ice Age Farmer, from what I know, probably done the best community service to everyone and what's ahead of us. So if you could see that clearly, and even if it wasn't the case, the idea of growing more wholesome food and knowing what you're actually getting instead of something coming out of a package that might be labeled organic and be only 51% organic and the other 49% isn't, but they're allowed to call it that because that's the law. I think there's a lot of merit. So going forward, it's about self-sufficiency, local community, and a shout out to James Howard Kunstler with, I think it's World by Hand. I mean, we're going to shrink down into less oversight. Now, I know that sounds contradictory to what everyone's learning about being tracked and traced, and I've said that in many of my videos and almost every weekly update. That's what they want. But whether or not that manifests 100% or not remains to be determined. There's obvious pushback from the populace that's seeing exactly what's going on here. And let's just say that the ability to push back peacefully still exists.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words with Christian and myself. He had been taken off of Twitter. I'd been banned twice already, so I just cut my account. So I put my last post and said, if you're going to these links, I'll no longer put anything that'll draw a crowd to your platform here. And I left my last post as it was. But going on to the animals, there's a couple of things. And I'll verify also the butchers here in East Tennessee are so far backed up that a couple of friends of mine, they go hunting and they had deer. And the person who usually will, butcher it up and clean it up, get you the cuts and whatnot, it's like, I'm so booked up. and they were good friends. And he's like, well, I'll be by Saturday. He goes, no, I'm going to lock the gate so you can't come in. Really, I don't have any space. So now the hunters around here are just saying, hey, does anybody have a freezer space? And then one of the best skills you could also learn is how to butcher your own meat and which cuts and follow the muscle lines, etc. And going back to the local farmer, the Amish, if you have any Amish communities near you, they offer cattle, but they're usually smaller cattle than, you're not going to get a 1,200 pound Angus out of them. Usually you'll get around a 600, 400, 600 pound. They slaughter sheep, they do cow. So you and your family could come together and, or David and I, we could say, hey, I'll take a half a cow. We'll spend it. We'll split it 50-50. And, I got space in my freezer for 300 pounds of meat and you do too. Getting in a community buy and having it be able to be processed somewhere where somebody knows what they're doing. See, that's a skill set that's going to be greatly needed in the future. Because if you bring me a quarter of a lamb or a quarter of anything, a deer, a cow, a hog, could be anything, a bear, you need to know how to be able to really cut that into being usable. You just can't cut it in squares and be like, that's good enough, because the different meats are going to cook at different temperatures and have different consistencies in the flesh there and the muscles. But what comes next? If the supply chains are breaking down, I'm going to call it, if you will, peak centralization. And you're right, they want to take us into this dystopian world, and I don't know if they're setting it up for us to manifest it ourselves, because I've been saying a lot that as the sun changes its frequency, that the manifestation capabilities in the human resonance field and the human mind are going to increase as well. And if we have a second magnetic field and we're electromagnetic beings, and then we have the sun over here with its magnetic field, like what's happening in our brains and our possibility of energy release of thought creating reality is going to be doubled or greatly, greatly enhanced. So I don't know if the powers that be are putting out this whole thing so we're going to manifest it for them, or we could pull back and go the other direction.
I agree with that. Peak centralization. I think it is going to break down. I mean, John Tater's book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, the more complicated it becomes, the more points of failure are possible. And so, I mean, if you go back to the Amish, you could take your cell phone and, dig a 1 foot hole and bury it and put it, and just not use it for a week. And it would have no effect on you growing your own food, animal husbandry, the whole thing of basically living off the land. Now, I realize that this is a concept that most people can't even fathom. I mean, they're used to going to the supermarket. I'm the same way. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that we're incapable or couldn't learn it fairly quickly. I mean, I've grown a garden for many years, and my success rate is not the greatest, but I have had some success. The point being that I think as more and more people just wake up to consciously or unconsciously moving out of the city and into the country and starting to become more self-sufficient will just be a natural progression of things. And this is basically anathema to the powers that be, because this whole 5G, 6G system is so fragile that any, tree blocks the signal, whatever. They need to force everybody into these little itty bitty cubicles so that they can track, trace, and look at you all, 24/7. But in order to accomplish that, they have to have it in this dystopian future that we keep looking at and hearing about. And it doesn't really work too well if you're spread out and that dog leash isn't, in your back pocket and you're just going about your own business. So I really do believe that this shift is coming in a manner that even the power elites may want it to go, but it won't necessarily go that direction. In fact, I'm voting, again, like James Howard Kunstler, that it's ruled by hand, that it's going to become more localized, and a lot of people are just going to ignore these powers that be that want to control everything in their lives.
Yeah, so jumping back in history, maybe, going all the way back to the Greek era is a little too far back, but the population migration that you've known of in the past, what are some of the catalysts? And again, how are people paying for their movement? We can go back through, World War II is a good one. A lot of people moved and migrated out. But since that time, or even since the 1920s, a lot of people migrated around. And if you want to go back to the potato famine, 1800s, okay, these are like the big examples of people migrating in mass. So people are going to come out to the countryside. What kind of problem would that cause? Because you have a bunch of city slickers, if you will, coming out in the countryside, and they always try to, now you need to live by our rules because we're here in the countryside, instead of like, hey, we're here, cool. don't bother anybody else. It seems to be an opposite of that, where the city comes out and tries to bring its rules with it to the countryside. But just generally in the past, things in occurrences of population shifting and moving, what kind of economy was happening at that time when these major shifts over the last, say, 50, 100 years were happening across the planet?
Yeah, I will address that. I just want to state before that the Arab Spring was touted by the powers that be to be a political thing. It wasn't, it was food. So, on that theme that you just outlined so well, yeah, it's going to be disruptive, and it usually goes with the main tribe. So, that means as these city slickers move toward the country and become more rural, the rural community has dominance because they have the ability to know what to do. For example, going back to your community garden, where it's just not this make-believe, everybody just rests on their butts and it's work, and there's got to be some structure. So if you look at that, who's the master gardener? Well, it's this little sweet old lady that's been gardening for 40 years, and she's got the greenest thumb of anybody. It's a natural order for that to be the lady that's basically in charge of how the garden's laid out and when you plant and all that stuff. It's just a natural thing that takes place. So as this flood of people come out to survive, if that's the case, and it certainly could be, at least in some instances, it will be an upheaval, but it will over time settle down into a more natural order, you might call it, or a natural law type of situation. So will there be disruptions? Will there be fighting? Will there be squabbles and all that? Yeah, unfortunately, there will be. But it will actually settle down, especially depending on the consciousness, which goes back to what you said, which I want to add on to, and I think you have a much better handle on it than me. But if we're seeing this magnetic frequency where the basic consciousness of the beings around us are starting to be enhanced, or become more heartfelt or integrated, heart, head, and hands, where we actually value what we are as these infinite beings, we start to really feel our true nature, let's say. Maybe people will walk out from the city with an open heart and say, hey, I'm here to learn, I'm here to contribute. I mean, I know that's maybe a fantasy, but I like to look at all possibilities. And certainly there is a possibility of a shift that people ask, the old adage with John F. Kennedy, that's not what your country can do for you, that's what you can do for your country. That's not what, the farmer can do for you, that's what you can do for the farmer. So I'm not going to rule that out. I think there's a lot in this community, and I've met many of them on my travels. Ole Damagard comes to mind, and he basically is of the belief that there's enough love in our human nature that we can overcome this evil. Again, it's a good and evil situation. So you come out with good in your heart, or what good can I bring, or what good can I do? That's a whole different attitude than just, geez, I need to survive. I got to take what I need to live, because you're going to do a lot better learning how to grow food for the rest of your life than you're going to by taking the food from somebody and surviving another month or two.
You would know way better than myself on the timelines of this. So this migration out of the cities into the countryside, when it's fully, let's say, populated, and the migration has shifted, and wouldn't say it's over, but it's reached its apex and it's on the way down. Everybody who was going to move out has moved out. I'm going to guess 5 years. Would you agree with that, or do you think it'll happen sooner, or will it take a little bit longer? So that transition point, I'm going to say 5 years, and like I say, you'd know better than I. What do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking of the answer and trying to listen intently at the same time. 5 is my guess. And the reason I say that is going back to what I said earlier. The more recent data has to be weighted more heavily than ancient data. So, if you're going back when no one had cars and it was a migration by foot or ox or donkey, that would be a whole different place. But now you drive there in 3 hours, and you're out into the quote unquote country, or at least into the suburbs. So I have to take that into account. I would say 5 is probably enough. And the most disruption usually comes from the most fear. Those that come out in fear that I've got to get mine at all costs, that kind of an attitude, that goes away. I mean, not that it isn't there, it will be there. But over time and in short durations, the big disruptions usually get quelled fairly quickly. Again, I think that there could be more or less harmonious, and I'm not saying instantly. I know there's going to be disruptions. I know there's going to be social unrest. I know there's going to be infighting. And what I'm trying to convey is that that is a part of the process. And the process is to get back to natural law, get back to harmony, get back to love, and get back to contribution to the community. And that will take place. The ones that are not in that mindset are the ones that we are basically standing up against, and hopefully a non-aggressive manner, the non-aggression principle, that we're just going to do our things, leave us alone. And there are enough pockets in the US, and I've traveled the world, not completely, but pretty close. There's a lot of places that are just these really small communities. I was just at one in Idaho about a month ago, and this place could easily survive almost anything with the amount of water and rivers flowing through it, the amount of natural pasture land, and the amount of animals, the amount of cattle, as an example. It's just one example, not counting the elk that were around, and the deer that were around, and the wild boars and everything else. Could give a cow for every person in the population, or maybe two, because that's how plentiful this area was. And this thing is so far tucked away in such a small population that, I mean, you really have to find it. It would be hard to overtake every one of those type of places. There's more of those type of communities than people think or realize, especially, of course, in the Western states from, let's say west of the Mississippi, but they exist. So it's going to be tough, but it's not impossible. And again, I think that there's as much hope as there is anything else. And I know you don't want to found everything on hope. It takes action. I mean, satisfaction, feel satisfied that you're getting enough to eat, that your life is worthwhile, that things are in the upbeat, comes from action. Satisfaction is because we took the action required to do what's necessary to press on. I think the big shift consciously, and I'd like you to talk about this because I really think you're onto something on this magnetic frequency change, is that we realize spiritually what we really need is not what we've been fed and told we need for so long.
Perhaps the farmers of the planet are realizing that we're waking up. And once enough people do become awake as to the situation around them, how central banking has been nothing more than a pillage device that has been sold as a stability device, and it has to be there in every country. If it's not there, then the countries will fail because they'll have no money. Like, that's what I've been told my entire life. But people are starting to wake up to the realization that, wait a minute, they've been taking 2% of your money every year beyond the taxes you're paying. And the awakening, that's, I think, why they want to cut communication channels at the moment, because the awakening is going into this snowball down the hill, speeding up mode of more people are seeing the way the real world is around them. I'm not going to say the injustice, maybe that's the wrong word, but the real state of the workings of everything that has been the base construct of the way our society is formed, in the power structure and everything in between. So at the top down layers, the way you see that now, you start to realize, wait, those people are nowhere near this whole upheld of honor that they would have. There's 0% of that. Everybody's waking up to that's a fallacy. We need a completely different system. All those people in there need to go, and they need to be replaced with farmers, for example. And then in the central banking. So now more people are looking at gold, silver, cryptocurrency to get out of the system. And there is this great awakening happening. So it's terrifying for the power elite, because once we're out of the box, we're never going back in. The only way you could go back in is to lie to yourself. And again, you're not going to do that. Once you see things and hear things and understand and live different ways of life, you're not going to go back to that same control system again. Work at home is a great example. It was a very quick transition, something totally unthinkable that we would not go back to offices. But once people adjusted after that first 6 months, now nobody wants to go back to an office and work. They find going back to an office so prohibitive, so constraining, being in jail again in a little cubicle. They're like, no way, I love working from home now. That's just the smallest example of what's happening. And once people see there's an alternative, they're going to jump on that alternative and move out into it. And that's the most terrifying thing. If you set up an entire structure of society that you ruled over, and everybody's moving a different direction, it's just like herding cattle. You're going to put something out there, go, no, go back the other direction. But then maybe some cattle will jump the fence. This great awakening perhaps is on a cycle. A lot of ancient cultures talked about these times merging right now, not really into the singularity like Terence McKenna talks about, but into a point of human awakening again. And there is a great awakening. It's been talked about for so many thousands of years, and here we sit at the precipice, and a lot of people are scared versus embracing it and just say, yes, this is the change we've been waiting for. This is the time to truly change humanity in a nonviolent way, using our personal manifestation and our personal thoughts. We as a human resonance can just bind together and create an entirely new reality. And how scary is that for controllers?
Yeah, yeah, real freedom. Very scary. They want to control.
You know, the morganreport.com. What's your newsletter? What do you have in your newsletter coming up for us if anybody would like to jump over there and take a look at what you have?
Yeah, well, on the paid side, I've done a lot about the central bank digital currencies and what controllers have in mind for us, and how to, what that means. But on the free newsletter, which I do the weekly perspective and videos like this, that's all for free. So it's on my own server. So I saw, a long time ago that our freedoms were being taken away at one point fairly gradually. And now, of course, it's been accelerated where anyone that has an open mind is censored. So we use our own servers, so we have little worries about being closed down. So it just comes from our own private newsletter, which is just the morganreport.com. And you can get on the free service and we mail it to you directly, or you can go on the blog page, and at the blog page at the top, there's a nav bar, and the nav bar goes to our YouTube channel, which obviously probably won't be there much longer, Twitter, which obviously won't be there much longer. We've moved everything to library right now. And I think I'll probably have my webmaster help me move to BitChute and maybe another platform. So we've got 3. I think Gab is probably looking like it may be the leader. But even me, as neutral as I am relative to some of these hot buttons, even what I say, I've had my share of strikes and closures for a temporary amount of time, but it's just basically bad boy, can't say that. I wanted to close out, and I don't remember the name of it, David, but it was a documentary I saw. I only watched it once. I should have bought the DVD, but I think it was like Our Tiny Farm or something like that. It's about an hour and a half long, and it was about this couple that knew basically zero about farming. But they hired this guy that knew almost everything. And he helped them with this creation of a permaculture. And basically, I forget how many acres. It wasn't like 100. It was like 20 or 30. I forget. But basically, they had everything in harmony after 7 years. So when they started the project, he said it will take 7 years. There'll be times where, there's too many squirrels and not enough, just for nature to find balance doesn't happen overnight. And unfortunately, the top guy, the overseer, we'll call it, that had the green thumb to my analogy of the master gardener lady earlier in our conversation, he unfortunately passed away. So after like 3 or 4 years of guidance, he was gone the last 3 years. But he had taught them enough to kind of like use their common sense. And one part of the movie, they're overrun with, I think it was some kind of rodent or something. And they realized, geez, if we put the fence down and let the chickens go over there, they'll start eating these things and it will feed them and it will bring balance to the farm. And it just went on and on. And it was such an incredible movie. I mean, to me personally, at least, that there is this way that we could be. And, we could have something close to that. Not in every climate. You couldn't do it in the Sahara Desert. But as you pointed out, as well as probably anybody, the grow zones that were once there are going away, and there's new grow zones coming on the planet. We've got to be able to adapt. And I like your name, Adapt 2030. You've got to be able to adapt. You've got to be able to look ahead. You've got to be able to, roll with the punches. We do have to have a chance favors prepared mind. Be prepared for almost anything, because we're going to have a lot thrown at us, but we can't get overreactive. We've got to respond, not react.
Yeah, I saw that movie too. It's called The Biggest Little Farm. I think the one you're referring to.
That's it. Yeah.
And see, what's the message out of that? Anybody can do it. You just have to learn it. I mean, how many of you knew how to use the computer when you were born? 0. You learned how to do it. So it just depends where you want to put your focus and energy on a skill to learn. And maybe, as a mind experiment, along with your gratitude list and your goals for the year, writing those down, maybe write a skill list that you want to learn. generally just start thinking and maybe, write 3, 4, 5, 6 down of skills that you would like to learn, and then, find the value and trying to hone it down into one. There's obviously somebody around your community like they found that can help and guide them through it. So it's going to be a great time. The things to learn, and like I said, getting back in harmony is going to be. I think that's the spiritual side of things that might be that last straw on the camel's back that does something to the society, and we get this energy that just goes through there. This reconnection with source again, reconnection with nature, and understanding that we're part of the cycle too. Instead of trying to dominate everything and just rip it to shreds and take it, nurture it. And I think maybe that's what this whole cycle might be, is to, the pendulum swung so far in one direction. We had to go through this tumultuous time to bring us all the way back in harmony again. And it sounds like so new agey to talk like that, but perhaps that's it. We went too far one direction, and, to come back, we'll hit that middle point, and then suddenly things will smooth because we found that sort of balance again. And then we'll move into that higher balance once more. But David, thank you so much for talking today. If you had a last thought on that pendulum swing, but yeah, because the great creator out there, that there's a balance in the electrical flow through our spiral arm of the galaxy. Things are, mathematically programmed, consciousness holding it all together at the base construct layer of everything in this dimensional level. There's creation behind it.
I guess I will take the last word, but there's so many discrepancies, what we can observe for ourselves. And one, of course, is you can never get a patent for perpetual motion. But all you have to do is take a look as an amateur astronomer and see that the whole galaxy is moving in perpetual motion all the time. But of course, we're told that can't exist. And yet that's the very nature of how things work. So I'll leave it at that. Question everything. Question your own belief system and really get grounded again. I think it's time to come back, and the pendulum moving back. David, I'm with you 100%.
Challenge for the week for everybody. Take your shoes off and walk around on grass or bare earth this week one time and see how different it makes you feel. Anyway, David Morgan, themorganreport.com. Thank you for your time and your thoughts. I always like to get reframed by other people's thoughts. So thank you very much for coming on. Have this posted through all the channels that I run, and we'll see you next time. Thanks everybody out there for listening. I hope you got something out of our conversation that can help you move forward. And also pass this video on. Pass it to people who are feeling this angst, this agitation right now, and just pass it and see if there's something in here that would help them try to alleviate some of the stress that they're feeling right now.